Hey, I wanted to offer you some more explanation about this essay, offer you some tips on how to do really well in it. The title of the essay is Imagining a Better World, and the challenge is to create your own version of utopia. I feel a lot of times in this class that the topics can be very challenging, and it's easy to walk away with this impression, um, a horrible impression of the world. And when you start to learn about these things, it can feel powerless. And so I added this assignment to help us inject a little bit of positivity. Marge Piercy says we can only know what we can truly imagine. Finally, what we see comes from ourselves, meaning that this is how social change actually happens. It's only once someone has imagined it first that it can actually be put into reality. This is really the first step, is imagining. And Marge Piercy, by the way, is a wonderful feminist science fiction writer. She wrote My Favorite Woman on the Edge of Time, and then as well as a number of other feminist science fiction novels, if you enjoy those things. This essay asks you to compose an essay describing your own version of utopia. What are the most important resources and how are they distributed? What types of work will be necessary and how will tasks be divided? What is the decision-making process? Now, supporting evidence should be drawn from the course readings and lectures. And I do think that based on Byrne and the other readings, that you have a really good basis to talk about things like economics, both in the home and globally, economic policy, decision making. In other words, I mean, decision making is really politics, right? How do the leaders make decisions that are good for the people, right? And your task is to flesh out the society in as much detail as you can. One of the ways that you could think about this is to go through Byrne and see all the things that are currently wrong with the world and do the opposite. But you should be able to build that. And you should also look back at your discussion posts, because in a lot of those cases, I've been asking you where you identify the problems. And now this is just taking it the next step to how you would fix those social problems. And you're not bound to be that practical in this, okay? Yes, it may be impractical that Americans would ever vote for XYZ, but in your utopian paper, you can do it anyway. That's the good news. Now, requirements. When I say requirements, it really does mean that those are required. I think maybe sometimes people see the assignment sheet and they're just overwhelmed with detail or whatever, but requirements means that these are things that you absolutely must do. Your essay must contain an underlined thesis statement. And I'm asking you to underline it just so that I can see exactly what your thesis statement is. It helps me when I'm going through it to see what you were trying to prove. It also helps you as a writer to have that underlined, because as you're writing, you can refer back to it and think, okay, what am I going to prove? As you write your concluding sentences, as you hone your argument, you can really see how everything relates back to the thesis statement. An excellent thesis statement is arguable and foreshadows the rest of your paper, those two things. Okay, so for example, a thesis statement is not a statement of the obvious, okay? Like a utopian society would be happy. Okay, that's obvious. I don't think anyone would disagree with it. It's very vague. It doesn't foreshadow. A thesis statement is something like, in a utopian society, our economic structure would be set up so that da 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 da, and the decision making would be this, right? And then you explain why that's important throughout the body of your essay. Your essay must reference course materials from at least 3 separate weeks. So part of why this is a midterm is that it tests your knowledge of the course. And so you do need to demonstrate knowledge of at least three different weeks of course material. That doesn't mean you have to cover everything, but you have to cover some of the materials from each of 3 weeks. Okay, and again, that's required. So I can tell you right now, out of 100 points, 30 of those points will be, did you reference the course material from each week? So if you haven't done that, it's going to be very difficult for you to do well. Now, some tips. Give your essay a title that is different from the title of the assignment. Okay, I don't like getting 7 papers with all the same title. It's very boring for me. And as a matter of style, it's not going to impress your professors. Include an introduction and a conclusion of 1 paragraph each. And in your introduction, you explain the general importance of the subject, and then you end with your thesis statement. That is, some people argue that it's formulaic, but it works every time. So be sure to pay attention to that. In your concluding paragraph, you should not offer any new information. It should just be a summary of what you've said, and then an explanation of why you really did prove your point. Okay. Now, within that, each paragraph should also have a topic sentence and a concluding sentence. So just as your essay has a larger structure, each paragraph has an internal structure with an introductory statement for that paragraph and a concluding statement for that paragraph. In the middle is where you provide the evidence. So if you think about it broken down that way, one of the ways that you can start writing is to write a thesis statement, bullet, the pieces of evidence that you're planning to use, and then start thinking about what sorts of introductions and conclusions you need to add in to make it make sense to everybody why, these pieces of evidence do in fact support your point. Set aside time for proofreading. It's very important. I've been generally very pleased actually with what I've been seeing on the discussion board. So I'm not anticipating huge issues. It looks like people are proofreading for the most part. I'm also seeing some good things with citations. So I'm fairly pleased with what I see. But still, mistakes happen, especially when there's pressure. So, and I strongly recommend that you print out your essay with ample time before it's due, and you read the printed copy out loud. I don't know why, but for some reason, when you print something out, you will find typos that you're not able to find on the computer. Maybe a psychology professor could answer that question for me, but I can just tell you that it is definitely true. So you want to do that. The due date is Monday, April 18th by 8 p.m. in Dropbox. If you remember, originally on the syllabus, it had said that we had a proctored midterm essay. In speaking with students, it seems like that was kind of an unnecessary burden and was going to be really difficult for people, and that's not my intention. So I have converted it to a standard essay, fairly easy for me to do, but it still does most of the same things, and it still tests your course knowledge, ultimately. Okay, so it's going to be due by Monday, April 18th, 8 p.m. in Dropbox, 3 pages long, reasonable font. Now, what I really mean is that if you... In general, the best font is Times New Roman. There's not a professor around who's going to give you a hard time if you use Times New Roman. Some people prefer other fonts, and that's okay, but I would caution you not to play around with the fonts too much or the margins in order to make your paper appear longer than it is. I will still know because I still won't see everything that I need to see in it, and it still won't have as much scope. So you're really only hurting yourself, my class and other classes, you're only hurting yourself by doing those little tricks with the margins and everything. And plus I know them all, okay? Just so you know, don't do it in my class, but in general, if you change the sizing of your periods, you can actually make your essay longer. That was a trick that we used to use. But you're just doing yourself a disservice. Now, citation styles, you can use any citation style at all, but just be consistent. I have a handout that I use for my other classes that I'm also attaching here so that you can see what the citation styles are and just how to do the basics, book, book chapter, and article, so that you know kind of the general conventions of MLA, Chicago, and APA. Those are the big three. In-text citations are also required, meaning that I want to see the page numbers for each of your quotes. So anytime you have a quote, you should have a parentheses with the author's name and the page number. Now, again, APA, Chicago, MLA, they all differ a little bit in exactly how that's done. So you need to check the conventions. But in general, the most important thing for me is not whether there's a comma or not, i.e. whether you've used APA or MLA, it's that you give me the page number and that you understand why it's important for me to have a page number. I've been requiring this for your discussion posts as well, and what I've been seeing has been pretty good, so I'm happy with that. And I don't see a reason to be concerned, but if you do have questions about that, you can ask me. Another great resource for citations is Purdue OWL's. So Purdue Online Writing Lab, OWL. They have everything that you could want about every citation, any citation style you could ever want, and I can't recommend it highly enough. But with that said, what I'm really looking for is honest engagement with the course reading, and some imagination as well. Remember, if you can imagination is the first part of the process towards creating a better world. If you can't imagine it, then we can't even start working towards it. So I hope you have fun with this one. I'm really excited to read them, and please hit me up in the coffee house if you have any other questions.